But let's kick off with Sean. So Sean is, let me get this right, leads the NICE's healthcare data analytics team. He's worked in healthcare data for over a decade, and his team uses real-world healthcare data in the evaluation of medicines and the development of NICE guidelines. So, welcome, Sean.
Oh, you can see it there. Thank you. So thanks, Alex and Danny, for giving me a 4 o'clock slot on a Friday afternoon. Thank you to you all for still being here. Well done. So I'm Sean, we're Associate Director for Healthcare Data Analytics. So giving you NICE's perspective on real-world evidence and OMOP, I'd probably say this leans quite real-world evidence heavy because I'm coming at it from a analytical perspective, I suppose. So we're less kind of concerned at NICE with how the data gets there. We're just concerned with how we can use the data for kind of meds evaluation and guidance development. So in case you don't know what NICE do, I'll do a very brief overview. So NICE's kind of mission statement is to give practitioners and commissioners get the best care to people fast while we ensure value for the taxpayer. So get innovative medicines to people by making sure it's worth the money. Basically, and we basically do this by providing guidance, so clinical guidelines on the best way to treat patients. We try and prioritize topics that are most important to the health and care system, so we try and stay relevant. We do rigorous independent assessment of evidence for health technology, so health technology assessment. And when we say health technologies, we really mean medicines, to be honest, right now, although that is changing a little bit. I can talk about that in a second in terms of how we think of devices. But so when NICE looks at a medicine, if we say yes to it, in the simple terms, it has to be available in the NHS within the next 3 months. So that's what we're considering, and that's the decisions, the impact of the decisions we make to the system. We slightly differ from the MHRA. Sometimes people get us confused. MHRA deal with regulation, and so they're considering efficacy, and we're considering clinical and cost effectiveness. And obviously, the most important thing as well is to encourage the uptake of some of that best practice and using data to try and track some of that best practice. So, but I guess NICE operates, we don't operate on our own. We're not in the ivory tower, although some people think we are. But we're trying to kind of change with how the healthcare system is changing. So making sure we have guidance which is high quality and timely. So doing it as quickly as possible. We're talking a lot more of how we can do things in line with the MHRA, so a regulatory decision made at the same time, or as close to at the same time as a HTA decision. Try and, as I say, focus on what's relevant, make sure our guidance is usable as possible. So how can we structure guidelines in a way so they can be implemented in clinical systems, for example, and trying to make sure we are impactful with what we do. So what are NICE focusing on really, this has actually kind of been, not upended, I suppose, but influenced by the recent 10-year plan. And there are a few things really important in the 10-year plan for NICE, three main things. One of the things is to make sure we do stuff better with the MHRA. So it used to be the MHRA would make a decision, and then you've got to lag until NICE make a decision. When the MHRA make a decision, clinicians can prescribe a medicine, but they're under no kind of obligation to, whereas, as I say, when NICE make a decision, it has to be available within those 3 months. So we're trying to do closer working with the MHRA, and so that's much more collaboration, sharing data, which has often in the past been confidential between the two organizations. Rules-based pathway for health tech. So this is new for NICE. So rules-based pathway for health tech essentially means health tech will get the same status as a medicine if NICE say yes to it. So a funding mandate being associated with a health tech device, which hasn't really happened in the past. So that's something new to NICE to focus on. We're working a lot on AI in terms of how AI is used in health technology assessment. And the kind of last big thing that came out of the 10-year plan is life cycle approach to meds evaluation. The big part of that is that NICE may retire technology appraisals. So we might use data to look at in the future medicines we say yes to, and we might start retiring those medicines. Because in the past, what NICE has done, and been probably rightly criticized for doing, is continually adding a list of positive medicines that people can use without ever kind of rationalizing that and reducing the amount of medicines that are available. So that is something we're going to do as well. And the reason the 10-year plan is important for that is because you get kind of the government buy-in to kind of give some backing when we upset pharmaceutical colleagues. Anyway, so real-world evidence and why do NICE care about real-world evidence? So I guess simply real-world evidence is the analysis of real-world data, and it might come, as we've talked about today, from things like registries, from electronic health records, some of the data collections everyone's been talking about. We're really interested in the Health Data Research Service that Jen talked about this morning. And so, yeah, we're really interested in these parts. You might use it, well, NICE will use it to think about how the patient experience is happening. We might try and be looking at quality of life, patient-reported outcomes, patient-reported experiences. It's really important to help us characterize disease and care delivery and look at outcomes in the real world. It can help us understand the impact of technologies on delivery of care, so how does care change after technologies in practice. Really importantly, and probably something I'll talk a bit more about, is it helps us generalize trial results. So trial results in the perfect world, how is that actually applied to the real world populations? We can then look at the effects of those technologies on patient system outcomes, and also what we do a lot of is using real world data to populate and validate our health economic models. And so, yeah, so just a reminder, when I say technologies, I usually mean medicines. So sorry about that. We've seen quite a lot of increase in the use of real-world evidence in single technology appraisals. So single technology appraisals means one indication. Basically, you can get multiple medicines for different indications and things like that. So we've seen it kind of go up. It dips a bit in 2022, but that's only because it was one quarter. So about 80% of all medicines submitted to us now contain some kind of real-world evidence. And NICE is in the unique position where we receive real-world evidence in terms of the companies submit their own real-world evidence. We also do some of our own analysis as well to kind of check the homework of the companies, if you like. And how it's kind of being used kind of varies. So that last slide was like any kind of mention of real evidence, whereas this talks more about how they're starting to use it. So in terms of appraisals and what they've been considered, like 50% now of those appraisals looking at comparative intervention effects. They might look at the non-comparator. So we're kind of, when we're looking at medicines, we're always looking at what's the current standard of care versus this new thing, and is this new thing worth the extra money, if you like. And then obviously it goes down further to like things like diagnostic accuracy of prediction, looking at surrogacy of outcomes. So it's mostly used for estimating the intervention effects, whether that be the comparator or the kind of intervention. And then this is kind of the last one, and this is how things are being used. So 96% of companies now, when they submit to NICE and when they're submitting their cost effectiveness analysis, so kind of like their modeling, this is in cancer treatments mostly, and a lot of our examples tend to be on cancer. The reason being is because cancer makes up the majority of all health technology assessment at NICE. Over 50% of our health technology assessments are focused on cancer treatments, because that's what is getting submitted to us. They tend to be, NICE has something called a severity modifier, which is when we take greater weight of the clinical effectiveness, which means we can essentially spend a bit more money on it. It's like an algorithm we consider. Cancer medicines make up the majority of severity modifier medicines. Also for cancer, because we do it so much, the economic modeling, the research questions, we usually know the kind of things we're going to be looking at. So it makes real-world data work well for those because we can kind of build up how we're going to use that data kind of irrespective of the condition, because we know the type of questions will come up again and again and again, so we can use things like reproducible analytical pipelines to understand some of that. So they're kind of using this in cost effectiveness, so costs, resource use, efficacy, patient characteristics, all these different examples. And so this is quite a busy diagram. It's a Sankey diagram. So this is some analysis that one of our external assessments groups do. So NICE commissions external assessment groups to do some analysis for us sometimes, but we do more regularly do some of our own analysis. But this is a good example, I think, for today, because to get this kind of information, you need to work more directly with the record, with the centers who are doing the data collection. It's hard to get this type of data from national collections, like something like SACT, so systemic anti-cancer therapy, because it's very difficult to do lines of treatment, as Jeff will know. Lines of treatment in SACT is really hard. We try and do it, but it's difficult. And so this is looking at about 1,300 renal cell carcinoma patients from 15 centres in the UK who delivered systemic anti-cancer therapy. And this was used to inform the NARS treatment sequences, the baseline characteristics, baseline risk. So what you're seeing is patients, what the medicines are on at the very top, and then what happens to them next. It's really, really helpful for NICE to know those kind of questions. So hopefully most people get to know progression. Unfortunately, some people die. And then a lot of what we don't know usually is how they switch. And that's the kind of interesting part you can get from this, and probably only something you could get from something like federated network analysis that you don't necessarily get from the national cancer data sets. And this is kind of the practical implications of what this helps us do. So if you think the kind of solid line is the new treatment, the dashed line is sunitinib. So sunitinib is the comparator, so sunitinib is the standard practice. The solid line and the dashed black line are what came from the trial submitted to us by the companies. The real world evidence is the different colors at the bottom. And so what you're seeing there is the standard care arm of the trial is overestimating the survival compared to what the data we just looked at was telling us. So there's an assumption there that they're overestimating what survival is, and therefore they're probably going to overestimate survival of the intervention as well. And this is probably because, like we know, most of the times trials have fitter patients. All things being equal, they've got renal cell carcinoma, but they don't have as many comorbidities or the same age profile as maybe the real world data does. And so therefore, the lifetime years is almost doubled in the trial arm extrapolations. So this is only for so many years, but as you extrapolate, those gaps become a big issue. And therefore, the relative benefit of the treatment is likely overestimated. It allows us to interrogate the data. It allows us to kind of question the companies a bit more. Maybe, not for this case example, but it could help us to say no, maybe to medicine, or more likely it might mean that something like the price might change to help with the quality adjustment, so the quality adjusted life year. And so what NICE think about real evidence then? So we developed our real world evidence framework. This is trying to increase the use of real world evidence to fill those kind of evidence gaps I've already talked about, improve the quality and transparency of reporting real world evidence studies. So that's what's really important, because we know real evidence studies aren't perfect. They have issues, they have confounding. So it's really important to be transparent about your different studies and how they've been done. Helps us critically appraise those studies, because as well as doing our own analysis, we appraise the studies done by others and trying to increase the trust in those studies. And so we're kind of describing how to, where and how you can use real world evidence to improve your recommendations in health technology assessment and your best practice for doing those. And it's kind of like a live framework. Everything we do at NICE now, we say it's alive. It just means we never stop updating it, really. So 2022-23, we looked at different tools you might use, looked at quasi-experimental studies. 23-24, we looked more at transportability. So how do you use data from different countries with different populations? We looked at some of American data with a company called Flatiron, how they can use some cancer data in America in the UK. It was like a pilot study rather than for a live technology assessment. In 24-25, we looked at clinical code lists and qualitative study design. And then this year, we'll be looking at federated data analysis networks. And then also, at some point, I don't know if it'll be done by the end of this business year or not, we'll be thinking about machine learning, AI for causal inference, and data generation. So some NLP as well in there, so how you can use NLP to derive data from free text fields and things like that. So we did a bit of a research study with a company called Acrivia on mental health data records. So most of these things we do in collaboration with experts in the field, because we don't have all the expertise within our team, because we're only very small. And so this kind of point, why are NICE interested in OMOP? NICE are interested in the standardization of data, I suppose is the high level point. To be honest, we're kind of agnostic to how that's done, but we're not experts in how it's done. So this diagram comes from work from Sang and Jess Morley, when they kind of had this lot of how data works in the UK. And so we're more interested in how you can go from all these disparate systems that we have in the UK. How can you unify them, whether that be via a HDRS, whether that's via SD, whether that's via federated data, and how you can get them to kind of unified real-world data source for analysis. And really importantly for us is how we can use international linkage with some of that as well. And so how we standardize data is the most important thing for NICE, and OMOP obviously is a great delivery mechanism for that. And one reason we like the idea of OMOP is kind of to this last point, really. I mean, so it helps IG challenges that we have. It helps reduce the amount of mapping and work that people have to do as analysts. But what's good about OMOP is it's being used elsewhere. So it's being used in Europe, it's being used in the States, which means it's easier for us to include some studies using UK data along with European, along with American data, and it helps us to answer some more questions. So questions, especially in America, where drugs might be launched before they are in the UK, so we can use the States as like a real-world kind of trial area to see how those kind of things happen, although we wouldn't say it like that, but that's kind of where the more mature data sets might become available that we can use and try and apply to our populations. So I think that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. Are there any questions from the floor? Okay.
For the renal cell cancer, did you match by stage and like by genomic subtypes, like, you know, whether it's PBMR1 or whether it's VHL?
So I don't know if we matched by genomic stage, but we did. We would have matched by stage. Sorry, genomic stage, but not by genomic markers potentially, because what was available from those set of trusts in the kind of Bristol area. Yeah. I feel like I'm going to get lots of very specific cancer questions now.
Okay, that's a challenge. So, Sean, thank you. NICE's adoption of real-world evidence has been absolutely massive for, at one level, the field, and it demonstrates the role that you have. And the role is that you can both encourage and almost force people to do things in particular ways. It would be really good if NICE was to begin to almost generate and distribute OMOP code to evaluate the adoption of technology. In other words, if you OMOP your data, this code will work. If you don't OMOP your data, do it yourself, that's fine. But actually, we're trying to help you. So you could encourage and unify the UK to move towards this information standard. So I'm sure it's a long-term plan, but for an organization that's thinking about AI and machine learning, I would encourage you to realize the important role you play in the NHS.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's something we are trying to think about. Maybe not all the time in terms of like medicines, but in terms of how our guidelines are structured. We've been trying to think about how we should structure them in well, first of all, a better way, because sometimes our guideline recommendations can be a bit woolly, for want of a better word. So how we can structure them better, I suppose we haven't necessarily thought about to that point. We've kind of thought about, you know, should we give relevant SNOMED ICD codes? We've thought about like the 5 verb vocabularies, but we haven't thought about OMOP, I suppose, as much. But that's a good point. I can take that away.
But the OHDSI International Group are using OMOP data in cancer centres to see if we're adhering to the European guidelines for the management of bladder cancer. In other words, they've managed to take the European guidelines and convert it into a script that runs against OMOP data. And in many ways, imagine if that was a NICE guideline, and here is the script that judges your adherence to this guideline. The enthusiasm to adopt OMOP would just change overnight, I think. guideline development analysis. We don't have to do it. Somebody else can do it. We'll just run it. It makes it incredibly efficient, which is why I think people will adopt it.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's a job then, yeah. Okay.
Any further questions for Sean? Oh,
Hi, I'm Helen Booth from the MHRA. I was actually at a presentation on Monday from someone from LSHTM who had done some work on use of real-world evidence in
Laurie?
nice single technology appraisals. I can't remember her name.
It probably was Laurie, Tuesday Laurie.
It wasn't. It was a student from South Korea.
Okay, not Laurie then.
She's published
Okay.
anyway. She was probably working with Laurie. But she was her focus was cancer again, which is, I guess, maybe because you were saying such a large proportion of your appraisals are related to that. But she was saying that a lot of the real world evidence is from US claims data. And I wondered if that was your experience more widely with other disease areas, and if you guys have got a preference for UK or European data and anything we can do to encourage that, and maybe that fits into kind of the OHDSI UK node.
Yeah, so we have a preference for UK data, obviously, and maybe and I think more recently we have now in my team doing our own analysis with direct access to some of the cancer data. So working directly with NCRAS, the National Cancer Registration Analysis Service. That's roughly what it's called. So we have direct access to that data now. So that's like SACT, RTDS, and cancer registration. So our preference is to use some of that data, and we'll be using some of that data more routinely. I couldn't include it in this presentation because it's for TAs that haven't published yet, so we can't include it right now. But that will basically be doing the same thing as I touched on. Maybe it won't be doing as much as line of therapy stuff because, like I said, it's hard to get. So it's for more relatively straightforward medicines that might have a indication as first line. So yeah, our preference, I guess, would be to always use that data because that's what NICE's recommendations apply to. But at the same time, there will be places where we might want to use it that we don't have mature data sets. So hematological cancers might be an area we've thought about in the past, that we haven't quite managed it with some work that was going on. But yeah, I suppose it depends. Like, yeah, UK first and then whatever else is available, really.
great. Well, thank you very much, Sean.
No worries.
Thank you.
No worries.